Good morning, Whitewater. You're listening to 91.7 The Edge. This is your host today, Ken, part of the Farms Radio Show, represented by the Wisconsin Farms Oral History Project. Check us out at wisconsinfarms.org. So it's been a little while since I talked with you guys. I know it's been about 3 weeks now. Last I talked with you guys was Professor Peter Jacobs of the Geography Department here at Whitewater, and I have another special guest today, Professor of Geology, Prajukti Bhattacharyya. Juke, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
Yeah. So, we have a lot of really cool things to talk about today in regards to your background and your expertise, such as you growing up in India, and then your experiences coming over to the States and to other countries traveling and doing research, and just doing a lot of research into areas of climate change and geology, and a little bit of the Department of Geology here at Whitewater itself we get to talk about. So I want to take us back in time to get us started off here. So I'd like to know, first of all, what are your experiences growing up in India and rural India in regards to farming and your thoughts on that?
I didn't grow up in a farm per se. I am a city girl, but I did have a good experience. Like, I spent some time being in farms during holidays and vacations, and at one point my family lived in a pretty rural area, so I'd go visit them during holidays. And some of the best experience I had were just walking down farmland with sugarcane on either side of it, and you break a sugarcane and start eating it as you walk down the sugarcane field. That's one of the best experience I have had. I used to look forward to doing that every summer when I went to visit my family. Just going out in the field and just pick up farm like things that are being farmed, and eat it right there. And that was a lot of fun. Just doing things like that with growing things.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, and when I was growing up as a geology student, we have to do field work, and geology field work happens in really remote areas, and a lot of those areas are farmed. So we'll go and look at rocks where people are farming right next to us, and they'll feed us like raw carrots and other things that they're farming, and they would just offer us all sorts of real nice food. That was cool, like really cool.
Yeah, that's really neat because that's an experience that I'm pretty sure it's safe to say most of us growing up, at least here in Wisconsin, probably never would have happened with us while we were growing up, even if we did live by farms.
No, it's part of the Indian culture. We have this, we feed people. It's part of the whole culture. Like, if a stranger walks into your village or community, you automatically take on the role of a host. So you offer them like fresh carrots or radish or whatever that's in your power to give, and milk and other things. And basically that's how we grew up. Like, you'll walk into a village and they'd be happy to see us, like all dusty and looking, carrying rocks, and they'll fill us up, let us fill up our water bottles, and just sit down here. Here's something you can eat." And like, they'll go out, pick up like fresh veggies out in the field, and they'll let us eat them. That was really cool.
Oh, that's a really interesting experience too. I remember during our preliminary interview when we were talking how one really cool aspect about growing up in this lifestyle is that where many of us Americans we go shopping, say like on a weekly basis, or in my case, as a more or less poor college student right now, on or like every other week. So with your case of growing up in these under these conditions, is you got to have a lot of fresh meals. It sounds like.
Yeah. When I was growing up, we didn't really have refrigerators because we didn't have the concept of why would we put food, like keep food in a like ice box. Basically, we can always go out and get fresh veggies every day. So what's the point of preserving something? And even now, even today, the farmers from the outskirts of the cities take their produce and bring to the city, and every morning they'll just line up next to the roads, and they'll be selling, and all of us will just go out. That's one of the rituals every day. So you pack your bags, you just go to the marketplace and talk to people and get fresh veggies and fish or whatever you want. And I was just reading on Facebook right now, uh, people that bring food that you don't usually get in the cities, like parts of the banana tree that you guys don't even know that that can be eaten, but we eat that, like the inner core of the banana tree. But it has to be chopped really fine, and not everybody can chop it up, so it gets cooked. So there are ladies who bring those things to city. They offer to chop it up, and you have to tell them like, no, I want it chopped this away, and they basically prepare your food right there for an extra fee. And this is like really common in India, and people get together like a farmers market every day and talk to each other and just hang out and get their food.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of like there's a lot of young farmers here in the States now that try for that very local community based feeling. And over here, that's something that with some of these younger farmers, so it's almost become more revolutionary. But it sounds like this has been going on with in your country for a while too. Maybe it's just the modernization of maybe the United States right now that creates that difference.
Yeah, I don't know. It's different here in the United States, but we do have a farmers market in Whitewater, and it is kind of picking up this based community and people coming in and interact with each other around food, which is, I think, pretty old. The tradition of interacting around food and food, making food and preparing food. So it's picking up here a little bit too. I enjoy that.
Oh, very nice. Do you have any other memories of growing up in this rural lifestyle and any other unique experiences like the ones you already described?
Like climbing up on mango trees and picking up mangoes from the tree.
I had no idea about that one.
You, well, that's mango trees are not common in Wisconsin, but in rural Bengal, West Bengal is where I grew up, and my mom's family are landowners. They still have land and fish ponds where you can harvest fish and orchards. But when I was growing up, we pretty much had the run of the fruit trees, so mangoes and guavas, and you don't keep a bunch of preteen kids inside when there's fruits to be picked up. So we'll climb trees and pick up fruit and eat it right there and fight with the birds and other animals who also wants to have the fruit. The only tree I could not climb was coconut trees. It's a little too high for me.
Oh,
But
yeah,
other trees, oh yeah.
that's cool. It almost makes it sound like each day was its own little adventure too, just to preoccupy your time.
Yes, it was adventure. You fall down from trees. You try not to break. Yeah, it's kids. Give them something to climb. And in a lot of rural areas, they have goats. Like in my mom's family used to have goats, like a big nanny goat with little kids, literal, actual kids, and they would just be in the room with us. So our bedroom or living rooms are just pretty much goat pasture. So the goats will just come in, especially when it rains, and we didn't want the animals to be in a wet, area. So we'll take them up, and the little kids, the four-legged kids, would sleep with the two-legged kids. Like if you know what I mean, like little baby goats and us will share the same bed, so nobody
Oh,
gets wet.
that's really cute. I like that.
Yeah, goats are nice.
Awesome. Yeah, so one of the themes I'll probably be touching up on throughout our interview here is your true admiration for just nature, I would say. Um, is this something that started developing during this time of your life?
I guess so. I always enjoyed being outside and just using my hands and my whole body for learning things and not just my brain. And I kind of fell in love with geology by when I went to my first field trip. So looking at rocks, not in a lab, not inside, a stale environment, but right out there in its natural setting, and just being outside and feeling the wind in my face, and that kind of really got me into what I started to study as an undergrad. So yeah, I think being outside helps.
That's awesome. I like those hearing those kind of stories too, where you were really confident that this is something you just really cared about, and you were able to recognize that at such a young age. It sounds like.
Well, that that and a lot of other things kind of fell into place at the same time. So I'm lucky to get this whole pathway of going into geology right out of high school, and then having the chance to continue on my studies, and then coming to US for my PhD.
Mm.
I went to Minnesota from India, where in winter it is 40 is about as low as it goes, and people complain, to Minnesota, where 40 below is nothing.
Hmm.
So yeah, that took something to adjust, but
Yeah, I can only imagine too. I mean, I've been living in the States since I was born, and I'm still not used to it. And a lot of people tell me like, "Oh, how do you get used to it?" I'm like, "You don't. You just
yeah,
don't."
you really don't.
And I was explaining that to my original randomly assigned roommate here too, because he was actually from Delhi, and he was complaining to me like, "Oh man, it's so cold here." I'm like, "Friend, it's only September 20th. It's not going to get any better."
Yeah. I talk to my mom every month, and every time I talk to her, even in August, how cold it is there, Mom? It's August. It's not cold. And she's like, is it snowing yet? Mom, it's August. It's still summer. And she can't even imagine like, snow falling from the sky. When first time I saw snow in Minnesota, I basically sat next to my window and kind of on gave my family a running commentary of what's happening.
Mhm.
They had no idea that the stuff you find in your refrigerator is actually falling from the sky, and getting layered in the parking lot, and they're cleaning it up. It is being piled up next to the sidewalks. So it's a paradigm shift for everybody.
Yeah, I think that is certainly such a surreal experience too for people that just never been able to experience that too. I know from firsthand experiences with some other friends and acquaintances of mine that I know came from Palestine and Pakistan, that they came over here for the first time during the winter, and they just had a blast. They're building snowmen, they're having snowball fights, they're just admiring the whole change of environment, really.
Yeah, it's once you get used to the whole concept, it's fun.
Hmm. So it's interesting seeing that kind of perspective from someone that didn't grow up in the state. Um, so I'd like to go into a little bit how you transitioned from coming from India over to the United States here. So did you get to do some formal education back in Bengal before you came over to the Twin Cities?
Yeah, I had my master's degree in India at the University of Calcutta, and then I got into the PhD program in Minnesota. So I was 25 when I came, so I already
Okay.
had a graduate degree, so grown up.
Oh, very nice. You definitely had your bases covered. So, you don't have to go like really in depth on this, but what made you decide to come over to really the United States, or just more specifically, Minnesota, the Midwest?
It was my thesis advisor that I worked with, Dr. Peter Huddleston, and he's a really respected scientist in structural geology.
Hmm.
That's my specialty, my background, and we started communicating when I was doing my master's. Like I was working in an area, and I read some of his papers on the topics that I was working on. And so I kind of wrote to him, and he sent me some of his other material. So we started communicating, and I asked him if it would be possible for me to continue my studies with him. And he said, yeah, sure. Just, send me your GRE scores and other things. So that's kind of how it kind of worked out. I got a teaching assistantship in Minnesota, and I sent them my GRE scores, and I got accepted. So I hopped onto a plane and just went there.
Alrighty, that's really cool. It's definitely just yeah, it's you just got on board right when you had the opportunity come to you.
Yeah.
Um, so correct me if I'm wrong too. You've been at teaching at Whitewater here for about 14 years now?
Yeah, I started in Whitewater in 2004, so 12.
Okay. Did you just happen to find an opening position, or did you go to other locations that I might not be aware of before Wisconsin here?
I got my PhD in 2000, and then I worked at Purdue University
Mm.
in Indiana as a visiting assistant professor for somebody who was on sabbatical, so I was taking his classes. And then I worked at St. Louis Community College for 2 years. That was a blast, teaching intro geology. And that's when I realized that I love teaching and working with students. And then the position at Whitewater opened up. And this position asked for somebody with my background, like structural geology and hard rock geology. So I applied, and here I am.
Awesome. And so, what are some of the courses? Because I'd like to touch on, before we go into anything else like climate change, I'd like to just touch on what you do here as a professor and just a way to
Yeah.
talk about your department.
Yeah, my department is geography, geology, and environmental science. So it's not just one uh, discipline only. We don't believe in disciplinary silos. So we are all interrelated, and we look at the planet Earth in multiple ways. So some faculty look at the planet as a, in the context of human beings. Some look at it in the context of the mechanism, like plate tectonics and mountain building and earthquake and all those things. Some look at it in the context of surface, like soil and water and climate and things like that. But it basically looking at the planet from multiple perspectives. The classes I teach are environmental geology, which looks at how the environment and humans interact with each other. So, what do people do when there is an earthquake? Or how do people deal with floods or climate change or things that we deal with every day? And what happens? What's the role of nature? And how do humans change it? And how do nature change human behavior? And I also teach intro geology classes, so basically talking about rocks and minerals and mountains and earthquakes and volcanoes and all sorts of fun stuff. We teach classes on oceans. I have a class on volcanoes specifically. There is classes on soil and water resources, dinosaurs. So it's basically a lot of fun classes that we offer.
Yeah, I know that I first got acquainted with you when I took Introduction to Geology, I believe, or just generally is called Geology. Back in 2014, that's how I met you.
Yeah, I
And
remember.
yeah, and even some of the other courses too. Like I had once again Pierre Jacobs, he teaches soil science, and Dale Splinter, who I'll be having him on in the future here, he teaches water resources as well.
Yeah, we play off of each other's expertise. So I talk about classes. In my classes, I touch on what Jacobs or Splinter talks about, and I tell them, well, if you want to know more about it, go take their classes. So we play off of each other's strengths.
Yeah, I know from my own firsthand experience just talking to some of the other students in your classes. I'm only an environmental studies minor, so I won't be taking all of them, but I've talked with other students that are in these areas of study as our majors. And that's one compliment that they've always brought up from time and time again to me is how you and the other professors are very motivated and positive about teaching these things and how you just intertwine your teachings with one another creates a very just engaging learning experience for these students.
It's fun. That's all I can say. How else can I teach?
Yeah. And I know Peter has a few other projects on the side. Are you doing any other, like in the now, are you doing any other current studies of your own or any other student or like projects you're leading for students right now that might be noteworthy?
Yeah, right now I'm just starting up a project in the island of Montserrat, which is in the Caribbean, West Indies.
Hmm.
So it's Montserrat WI, not Montserrat, Wisconsin. It's in West Indies. And that island has an active volcano. Active as in smoking from the Google Earth image
Oh,
taken
wow.
2 weeks ago. So I went and visited that island last summer, and that volcano destroyed their capital city, Plymouth, in 1996. So that city is called the modern day Pompeii. It's completely covered in ash flow, and it destroyed the city just like it destroyed Pompeii. And I'm trying to get a project in that island. The northern part of the island is populated. The southern part, where there is the volcano, nobody lives there. Nobody can live there.
Mm.
There is no vegetation. I mean, there is a huge difference between north and south in terms of trees and other animals, plants living there. So we are trying to get a project out there to look at how the volcanic ash is affecting rivers. Like you dump a lot of ash in the rivers, then the rivers have to kind of reset themselves, cut the channels, and find their own pathway. And how does that dynamics work? And we are working with the land resource management in Montserrat to look at the GIS maps. And we got our remote sensing person, Dr. Rocio Duchesne, in our department. And she is thinking of putting in remote sensing images and looking at ash chemistry from remotely sensed images. And there I come in with ash chemistry and how that interacts with the soil and how does that change, what's the extent of different generations of ash from 3 different volcanoes on the same island. 2 are extinct, 1 is active, and how do the ash chemistry from the magma chamber impacts the soil and the vegetation and human behavior up on the island. So that's something we are trying to get together. I also have projects based in Wisconsin in mining. So we are looking at the core, drill borehole cores and drill cores from an area near central Wisconsin to look at the sulfide mineral composition and how they became a deposit that's worth mining. What's the chemistry and other changes that goes in there? So yeah, there are a couple projects that I'm pretty excited about right now.
Yeah, I certainly got your hands full with all that too, and I'm sure that you're just as excited as you sound right now about them. And it's really interesting too, even the first project you mentioned too, I wasn't even aware of that event that happened there or of this location, I'll be honest. And so that's extremely curious, and especially that you get to just travel there firsthand and even take some students there during what sounds like the summer months to just do some firsthand experience.
Oh, those are the best. You go out there. I was there in summer, and you go out there. It is a Caribbean island, so you have oceans, beaches all around you, and there is a volcano, and there is a rainforest. And I am planning to take students out there to do research on site, collect samples, and look at their spectral signature and all those things, and then bring them back. Look at them in the lab and see how the chemistry, if we can map the chemistry of the ash at different parts and see if we can find the topography of the area and how that is changing with the volcano kind of pushing the ground up and wind and water kind of eroding things down. How do the topography react with all these different forces that are playing on land? And that's pretty much geoscience that's a natural laboratory right there that we can go in and collect samples and get data and see how islands behave. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, so that's a lot more exciting than any sort of artificial lab you could set up, just that natural environment. It's really, really cool stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to start going into the topic of climate change too, because I know that's something that you have a lot of personal studies into. So we can approach this from a lot of different angles, the way I see it. We could start on a local basis. Local could mean just southern Wisconsin. Here could mean Wisconsin, the Midwest, or even just the United States. And then we can probably go into maybe internationally. That could be back in India again as well, or any other country that you have understanding of, or just even generalizing occurrences. So does that help you get like at least a good starting point off from
Yeah.
there?
So I was just thinking, have you heard of the study that the soybean farmers are getting a bumper crop this time?
I think I have come across a few articles like that.
Yeah, and that's one of the n- expressions or one of the effects of climate change because the growing season has grown. Like, for example, it's December 4th, and today is the first time we are having snow compared to by this time last year. There was snow on the ground.
Okay.
And so changes in climate. Now, I need to kind of clarify weather
Yeah, I
and
was actually just
climate.
about to ask, like, could you just clarify, because this is such a misunderstood topic, the way I see that. Before you go into examples, I'd like you to just give an explanation of what is climate change and how it occurs.
Yeah, and weather and climate, weather is like your mood. It can change weekly or daily or can change in an hour or something. Climate is like your personality. So you even if you're a nice, easygoing, happy person, you might have a bad day and your mood might be different than your personality. So climate is a long term, like what's overall long term thing. And weather is a short term changing. And climate changes weather. So if your climate, if your personality is not a nice, happy, person, then your moods are not gonna be nice and happy all the time. So your personality affects your mood. In a short term, your mood affects your personality a little bit, but in the long term, climate is the big long term impact. Weather is what's happening every year or each or any specific month or something like that. So just because some year might have a really bad winter or some year might have no snow in the winter doesn't necessarily mean that the climate is either cooling or warming. But the overall, like 30-year average, what we see is the temperature, the global temperature is going up. And 2016 by now, I think, has some of the hottest months, like hottest September, hottest October. So it's on a trend that the temperature is increasing. It's not really rapid yet, it's slow, but the trend, if we go back to the 1950s and take the global average temperature, it's on a warming trend. So that's what we are talking about when you say climate change. That overall long-term average temperature is going up. And the big problem, what I see, is not the fact that the climate is changing. Climate has always changed. But the fact that I find more concerning is how fast it's changing. It's a rate. So I'll give an example. Your heart beats, right? And that's a good thing, right?
Yes, I would hope so.
You hope so. So changing a beating heart is a good thing. But when you go onto the treadmill, you have your like the fat burn zone, the cardio zone, and all those, right? And then there is a red line, and you're not supposed to go past that too much.
Yes.
So if you, like for me, it's 150 plus. So if my heart starts beating faster than that, then I need to slow it down. Because the faster it beats, the rate going up means my whole body, my system, may not be able to deal with that for a long period of time. So it's not the heartbeat that's the problem. It's how fast. The rate is the problem. And for the climate change, that is the biggest thing. It's not the fact that the temperature is going up. If it goes up over 10 million years, I'm good with that. But it's growing within decades. And that rate of changing is causing a lot of stress in a lot of different areas. So the biggest thing is not to stop climate change. I mean, if we stop climate change, we might become Mars or something. I don't know. But it's to slow it down so it doesn't reach like over a degree centigrade change within a short period of time. So every other system that makes up this planet can have the time to adjust to the changing climate. And that's what the biggest thing is, because it is moving, it's changing so fast. A lot of the other things like agriculture, like growing season, like people, like water, availability of water, these are all changing too fast for every other animals and plants and people to adjust to it. So that's the biggest problem that I see right now.
Yeah, I think that's an extremely fair assessment on this whole situation too, because I know with myself that I try to go about this whole conversation because of the nature of it in the most honest way as possible. And one of the biggest misconceptions that I see too is people will either provide their kind of usually pseudoscientific input on this topic, and a lot of times those results might be a bit exaggerated or under exaggerated of the actual effects. And I think one of the biggest misunderstandings too is how with this whole climate change issue, it's not as like you said, it's not about climate changing because that happens, and it's not about climate changing quickly because that's also happened too, but it's about artificial influence by humans that might have changed that. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, and we have a lot of evidence on that. Like global climate, one of the biggest players in climate change is carbon dioxide. If we did not have carbon dioxide, we'll become Mars.
Yeah.
No liquid water, no life as we know it, dead planet. So carbon dioxide plays a huge role in keeping the temperature constant. And the way it does is like, for example, you're wearing a t-shirt. If you go outside in your t-shirt, how would you feel?
Yeah, very cold on a day like today.
Very cold, right? So if you put on a jacket on top of your t-shirt, you're going to feel nice and warm. So the jacket is stopping your body heat from escaping your body. It's trapping the heat inside. Carbon dioxide acts like a blanket, like trapping the Earth's heat from getting lost in space. So one jacket would feel nice. What if you wear 20 jackets?
Yeah, a bit too much there.
A bit too much. So you'll start boiling, right?
Yes.
Because it's overheated. And that's what we are trying to avoid, having too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, that has other effects too. Carbon dioxide dissolves in water, so your fizzy drinks have CO2 in there, so it gets the fizz. And if it dissolves in oceans, that impacts the animal shells. The seashells need calcium to build their shells, and so they're dying. So that's a whole different issue. And the extra carbon dioxide is coming from burning coal and oil and other fossil fuels. And we have evidence of that pretty well stated from ice cores in the Antarctica that have air bubbles trapped inside the ice. So you can get a continuous record of what the atmospheric composition used to be and what it is now, looking into the air pockets, air bubbles trapped in ice. And we can go back to 100,000 years in a continuous layer of ice cores. And we can see how the carbon dioxide started increasing right after the Industrial Revolution, when coal burning became the norm, and how that's going up today. And that's primarily human action. Nothing else burns carbon dioxide or creates carbon dioxide like that.
Yeah.
Before, it used to be volcanoes that release carbon dioxide and that got into the ocean and got trapped into the rock. But today, the volcanic eruption signature is really tiny compared to what the human beings are doing. And if you analyze the CO2, the carbon dioxide that comes from fossil fuel have a different isotope of carbon than volcanic carbon dioxide. So you can actually say how much percentage is coming from burning coal and oil and how much of that percentage is coming from not organic carbon. So it can be pretty well documented.
That's incredible. I never knew that you could observe something in that way.
Yeah. The C13 to C12 ratio, the two different isotopes of carbon, are different for organic and inorganic carbon. So you can say, like quantifiably, like 90% of more of the carbon dioxide that is coming into the atmosphere are coming from fossil fuels.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good way to just putting more like just a better look at this whole case as well. Because, I mean, regardless where this climate change is coming from, it's bad news for us either way if it's accelerated. So
Yeah,
you're going to want to know where it's coming from.
it's coming from a lot of different sources, and some of them are now tipping each other off. So if you increase the temperature, there is the other second most important greenhouse gas. Is pretty soon going to be probably the most important because it is more effective than CO2, is methane. That's like when you rot anything, you generate methane gas. That's the swamp gas. And a lot of it is trapped in frozen soil in the Arctic Ocean. So animals and things die, they get buried, and the swamp gas that's released by the dead bodies is trapped there. So if you change the temperature of the water, now that frozen ground is releasing the swamp gas. So that's adding to the global warming because methane is more effective, even though it's not as much in the atmosphere, but it is more effective. So a tiny amount of methane, 7 times more effective than CO2, will be a lot more dangerous for changing the temperature. It also comes from rice farming, from cows, from a lot of different things. The little critters that eat wood, like what's the bug that eats wood?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I think there's a big epidemic of them still going on in Colorado. I know what you're talking about. I just forget the name of them.
Yeah. So let's say woodworm.
Yeah.
And they generate methane as well. So that's a whole different gas that wouldn't have been in the atmosphere until the temperature changed just enough to start releasing them. So now they're increasing in volume. And all these impacts agriculture in a lot of different ways, and not all of them are good.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'd like to, because we have about like 20 minutes here, so I'd like to spend the rest of the time just talking about how this relates to farming. That can be positives or negatives, as you implied.
Yeah. Positives are, okay, carbon dioxide is essential for plant growth. Plants take in CO2 and they make photosynthesis and they generate their food, and that's great. Except it's great for specific plants like rice, wheat. The growing seasons for those would be longer, like soybean. We started the conversation with that. So you'll have bumper crops of those because they enjoy more CO2 and enjoy the longer growing season. So you'll grow a lot of them. But the other things that you get in the crops, like nitrogen, zinc, iron, protein, especially in soybean, those percentages are going to go less and less with more CO2 coming in the atmosphere. That's how the trees react. And so they might grow a lot of them, but you won't get as much nutrient from the longer growing plants. And other plants like sugarcane, maize, and all those, they have no impact at all. Like more CO2 or less doesn't really matter to them. So you are getting a good crops from some plants, not from others. And the plants that you actually grow a lot, you might think that, we can solve the food problems there. And not going to happen because you're not getting enough nutrients from those plants as you used to be. Plus, climate change also impacts rainfall. So some areas might get more droughts. Some areas might get too much rain, as in floods. It also changes the soil properties, so you can bake the soil with higher temperature. Pests and all those bugs that usually die off in the winter will not. So you're getting a lot of those bugs that kills the crops. So it's not just the longer growing season, it is also how much water do you have available if it doesn't rain when it's supposed to. I think last year the cranberries got a big hit.
Yeah, I did actually post an article about that too a couple months back for the Wisconsin Farms page on Facebook. So yeah, I did read about that.
Yeah, so that was one example of what can happen. It was a longer growing season, but an unseasonal frost, or like it just became cold where it shouldn't be
Yeah.
in January. So then people lost their entire harvests, and that's one of the impacts of climate change because climates impact weather. So you change the overall temperature, you are changing the frequency of rain. Either it is becoming thunderstorms or snow if it is cold, and drought. You're evaporating more water from the surface, and you can say that water evaporates, it'll rain down, but it doesn't rain down on the same spot. So it evaporates from, say, southern Wisconsin, but it rains into the Lake Superior area, then you're losing the water because you can't use that as part of your irrigation. And you also lose the water because if it rains on a city, it's all paved, so it doesn't soak into the water, so it doesn't get part of the groundwater. It just drains out and goes into lakes or rivers that you can't really use it. This is happening everywhere, especially India. We started the conversation,
Yeah.
the agriculture is totally dependent on monsoon. Monsoon is you expect rain to come at a certain month, and you don't expect rain to be in certain months. So you plant your seed during the rainy season, you harvest them when you don't expect rain. Now the monsoons are changed. The time when the rains are supposed to come, they're getting droughts, no rain. When the rains are coming, it's like torrential, so you can't really do anything about it. It's flooding the fields. So too much water in a short period of time. So that's destroying a lot of the planting season, or planting basically, that flooding the young plants. And then when it's not supposed to rain, it's raining a lot, so you're losing your harvest. So it's getting a lot of loss. I mean, the farmers are facing a lot of loss because of the monsoons getting impacted by the climate change trends. So that's a pretty big concern there in India and a lot of other places in the agriculture, where agriculture is the way of life.
Yeah, I know that I've recently learned myself too just how much of an agriculture giant India is, just because under ideal conditions it is just suited to have that environment too, which is once again, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the reasons why there might be so many people that live there too, because there's just so much potential for this huge agriculture, and now with this climate change, it's just constantly being threatened of being changed.
Yeah, it's a big growing concern there. I was reading up some of the reports by the Indian government of what to do with the climate change and how to deal with it. And I saw the problem in a lot of articulated, but not many solutions. Because what do you do with the entire climate changes? You can't really. You can adjust your growing seasons, but that takes time. I mean, when you're expecting things to grow, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to hold off for a month and then plant the seeds. Then you won't give them enough time to become plants.
Yeah.
So it's a huge concern there.
Yeah, and have you noticed any other countries too where there's other observances being made or currently unfolding, whether they're fully understood or not yet?
Yeah, pretty much every country that has agriculture, they're facing these things. And it's not climate change, it's not just rain, it also impacts river water. For farmers who depend on a river for their water, and if the river dries up, then what do?
Yeah.
You don't have water and you can't plant your crops if you don't have water. That's kind of what it is. So the Aral Sea in Europe, in the Middle East, Europe, has dried up because it was supplying farmers with water, and because they're not getting enough rain, so they're taking out the water from the lake, pretty much. Lake Victoria facing the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I heard about that too, how that's become a huge major crisis.
It is, and once you start drying up the inland lakes and inland seas like that, it impacts not just agriculture but a lot of other things, because water is life for everybody. Without water, you just give up,
Yeah.
basically. So that with lots of evaporation, the pattern of evaporation and rainfall changing all over the world, it's causing a lot of problem, like the Syrian crisis that started out with the drought that stopped people from being in their farms, so they migrated into the cities, and other like societal stressors took over. So now we have a humanitarian crisis in Syria with refugees. So that's things like that are happening all over the world. That can be traced back to impacts on the environment because of climate change.
Okay. And to scoop back a bit to a more local area as well, too, being Wisconsin, one thing that I would like to know myself, too, on that I was reading about is that with these changes in climates, if you look at it from horizontal latitudes, longitudes, then it almost is as if as climate changes, or as, let's say in this case, getting warmer, that you might start over time, like in many, many years, start seeing Wisconsin's climate. Would there be a possibility of seeing, say, Wisconsin's winters be more relatable to that of, let's say, southern Indiana or southern Ohio in many, many years?
Probably. It'll become more, warm.
Yeah.
So it depends on a lot of other things, though, how the air mass in the Arctic latitudes behave if they come down and bring cold temperature with that. Like last year, there was incredible cold because of the polar vortex
Yeah.
doing stuff. That Alaska was warmer than Wisconsin. So there would be some of those kind of impacts there. And I try not to speculate because it's a lot of arm waving. But eventually, yeah, Wisconsin might become like more southern states.
Yeah. So it's something that's definitely not theorized, but it's something that, as you said, could be certainly speculated to be a possibility. But it depends on probably many other factors that we're just unaware of yet, too.
Yeah. And that's the uncertainty in all the modelings, that there are a lot of factors that are combined together to make change like this happen. So, yeah, as you probably still have people who remembers like real deep snow in southern Wisconsin, like serious snow that's 6 feet or more deep. We don't have that anymore. So that's a change within people's lifetime. Like people in St. Louis and all those places complain when there is like a little bit of snow, but those places used to have a lot of snow less than 100 years ago. So that has changed. So these changes happen slowly, but you do see that over people's lifetime.
Yeah. It's something, too, that, I mean, I can't really speak because I'm only 24 and I haven't seen any major changes yet, but I think that's more a telling tale of just my age and not so much the trends. So, but I have noticed that as I've gone older, there's been slight changes. Of course, there'll be like your polar vortexes, and some winters will be worse than others. But yeah, it seems that nowadays too there is like some slight differences, and I think one thing that people don't realize on a larger scale is just how much of a difference, say, if a global climate change, or that could be on the state level or just a worldwide level, just 1 or 2 degrees, how significant that is.
Yes, and that's another thing. 1 degree's change in temperature implies a huge amount of heat that went in to change that temperature. So you're talking like energy, the heat energy that actually changes the measure of heat. And 1 degree is huge. I mean, if you're considering it's changing over the entire planet and how much heat energy it needs to be on the surface to change that. And 1 degree's change, whether it is going up or down, have you heard of the world without summer, the year without summer?
It rings a bell. I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Yeah, it was in 1800s, and there was a volcanic eruption at that time, and that sent out so much sulfur dioxide and gas.
Oh, I know what you're talking about now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're the one that told me about this.
Yep, that's one of the incidents where 1 degree's change within a year, that basically snow in July in New England, and that completely destroyed crops. So there was no harvest, so starvation, and a lot of people died because of that. So it was even less than a degree. And just a little bit of upset like that can have ginormous impacts.
Oh, yeah.
So that's where I was going to, like, this change is okay, but the rate, how fast it is changing,
Yeah.
is the one that we should be concerned about.
Yeah, and I think one of the other common misconceptions, too, when it comes to climate change is people might make the argument, too, of, well, I've been living in some location and the weather's always been the same or pretty much the same my entire lifetime. And so I don't see how it is changing. Where global climate change, it's more making the statement that on a planet-wide basis, the climate's changing. So let's say, it would be like saying, give an example here, that you give a class a test. So you have 20 students. And then the first semester, the highest level grade you get is a 90, but the class average is an 85. And for the second time, you get the highest grade back with like a different 20 students. You get the highest grade back, and it's a 95. So you're thinking, oh, it's doing better here. But then the class average might be an 83.
Yeah.
So it'd be like that analogy. And so even like, let's say if you lived in northern Wisconsin where it's always been cold and it hasn't changed, then that's a good thing for that region, but it doesn't change what's going on in the rest of the world.
And different places change differently too. So right now, the fastest changes are happening near the poles. So the Arctic and the Antarctic, that really coldest part of the planet, are warming up much faster than the mid-latitude. So that's another thing too. So if you live in Wisconsin, that's a mid-latitude area, or if you go towards the equator, it doesn't change as much. You know, it's cold or warm or seasons. I mean, that has been always the case. But in the Arctic and in the Antarctic, where it used to be really cold, now they're warm to the point that it is incredibly alarming. So now you don't have ice in the Northwestern Passage. You can have a seagoing ship going across the North Pole. That wasn't the case. So there is no ice to stop ocean-going vessels on the water. So that has melted, which is really cause for concern right now, because the temperature change in the oceans control the ocean circulation. So water goes from hot to cold, just like warm air going into, water going from hot, kind of climbing up and becoming cold when you boil water. It's the same thing with circulation. So water from the equator goes towards the poles from warm to cold and then come back from cold to warm. If the temperature in the Arctic Sea becomes close to the mid-latitudes, that circulation is going to stop, because now the temperature difference is not enough to make the water flow. And when that stops, a lot of the places near the ocean, if the ocean currents slow down or stop, now you're going to see a lot of other impacts that we don't want to go into right now in details, but that's going to happen.
Yeah, you're certainly right, and that's really incredible now too. And I know we could go on hours and hours and hours about this and many other topics too. So we do have about 5 minutes left. So I want to ask, before we get to our closing here, is there any other touch-ups you do want to do about your personal stories you have, or any of the climate change or anything in between that we've talked about?
I love living in Wisconsin. Let's put it out there. It's a great, and Whitewater, it's a great place to live and work, and the people are incredible. And I've been in a lot of different places, and I feel pretty comfortable being in Whitewater. And the one thing I'd ask your audience or you to make yourself aware of all these issues that are happening, come take classes with us and see, because this is a problem that you get to solve. And if you don't know what the problems are, there is no way you're going to find a solution. It's up to everybody to find a solution to address all these issues. So I'll have your audience come talk to me in my office in the department, maybe, or whatever. But get yourself aware of all these.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's just you yourself among one of many geography, geology professors here and the sciences. You have a plethora of research and anecdotes at your disposal that you could use for this and many other discussions. And I think having these honest discussions about topics like this is extremely useful. And like you said, just educate yourself too. There's a lot of information out there with this, and because of the nature of it, there's unfortunately a lot of misguided information provided too. So I think that just looking into those honest research is the best way to understand about it.
I agree.
Well, hey, thank you so much, Duke, for being on today. It's been a privilege to have you here, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful time. Like I said, we could go on for hours and hours with this, so maybe in the future we might be able to have you on for a second showing too. So we'll see how the schedule looks for the coming semester.
Certainly, and I loved being here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, totally. Well, everyone, you've been listening to 91.7 The Edge, WSGW Whitewater. This is Ken, and this has been the Farms Radio Show. And this is represented by the Wisconsin Farms Oral History Project. If you want to learn more about that, you can check out wisconsinfarms.org. And what that is we interview different farmers and different people in the agriculture industry around the state for all sorts of fun, interesting stories and discussions. So once again, I'll bring on some tunes for you back here, and you all enjoy the rest of your first snowfall here in Wisconsin, and enjoy the